Livingston,
Here.
Teratio,
Here.
Weaver, Perrin,
Here.
Mackey, Walker, English, Newton.
Present.
Thank you.
And just for the record, I know our chair, Chair Walker, will be joining us a little later, and Ms. Mackey will also be joining us online. But we do want to move forward with the agenda as planned. And so the next order of business is the adoption of the agenda as printed. Mr. Brown or Ms. Carrillo, do we have any changes or modifications to this agenda?
No, ma'am.
I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
Madam
Yes.
Chair, there is no need to.
There's no need?
There's
Okay.
no need to make a motion. It's a
Okay.
work session.
All right, well, we got a full-fledged agenda right here in front of us, okay? All right, so as business as usual, for a work session, then we will move forward with our discussion for today. The purpose of today's meeting is that over the last several months, the Coronavirus Ad Hoc Committee has been tasked by full council to look at an award process of $16 million to be awarded to the general public through nonprofits and small businesses. Today, we will have an opportunity through this work session to go through the applications for only the nonprofits that have been recommended for funding. I would like to encourage this body to, as we move forward with this conversation, it is just that, it's a conversation, it's a work session. And there's a couple of things that I'd like to task the body to do, as this is just the first phase of us looking at these applications. If you have specific questions about applicants, that you forward your questions to ACA Thomas. And then during the final vetting process, she will get those questions answered for us by the applicant and return back to us. I also would like to just lift up to this group to note that we know that every application, we received well over 400 applications. And with those 400 applications, what we have before us are the ones that have gone through at least 2 phases of vetting through our third-party guidehouse. And this is the recommendation. We note that there was a minimum criteria that was scored upon our rubric that got this group of applications to this part. And so keeping in mind that there, in some cases, some applicants may have scored 70 and some may have scored 50. And with that in mind, we already know that when we put this application forward, that we wanted to level the playing field for all nonprofits. So if you had a large nonprofit that had full support of a national backing or state backing and large funders, that we wanted to level the playing ground for the larger organizations versus the smaller organizations. What does that look like moving forward? What that looks like moving forward, if we make recommendation for any one of these applicants to receive funding, that our third-party guidehouse will work with them on monitoring their process, noting that larger organizations may need more monitoring, and some of our smaller organizations may need additional support. It is, at the end of the day, it has been the task and the focus of the Coronavirus Ad Hoc Committee to make sure that everyone who applied and met the guidelines and scored appropriately would have an even playing field. And so as we have an even playing field, that means that some are going to get additional support, but we all want anyone who gets these funds to have the support that they need so that Richland County fares well by the funds that we expend out into the community. And I just wanted to kind of lay the groundwork as we move forward with this discussion. As we see it, this is the first step. Then after this meeting, we're going to ask administration to have some tasks that the committee already has in mind, but then it may be some other tasks that the full body may have to give to the administration. And then from there, that group will come back to our committee. And then once it comes back to the committee, we're hopeful that we'll be able to make a recommendation to full council at that point. So without any further delay, I'm going to, Mr. Brown, will ACA Thomas be leading the conversation here today, or are there any opening comments that you'd like to make?
I really think the process will be led by our consultant on this process,
Okay.
Because we want to make sure that we were independent in this process from the staff and council standpoint. If there are any, opening remarks, we would just say that this is a continuation of the process. And with that being the case, we're ready to proceed. So,
And who's leading that conversation online?
his name is Mr. Dustin Hinkle. I think you see a DH on there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And so before we turn it over to Guidehouse, want to open up for any comments that the body may have. Ms. McBride, you're recognized.
I just wanted to make sure, Madam Chair, that this that is before us consists of or is comprised of those entities that were recommended by the consultant firm. Is that true? I just wanted to.
Based on going through the scoring process and the vetting, yes, ma'am.
Is there, at some time, will there be a area, because most grants have an abstract for people who are not going to read the whole grant. I've read them already, but there's an abstract telling what the program is about. What we're dealing with here is just no abstract, nothing for the public even to see what these programs are about. So will there be an abstract telling a little bit about each program? And it's a general format that most grants have. And the other thing, at some point, I would like to see, and I think we may have been given it, I can't recall, but I want to see, because I want the public to know all of those applicants that applied for a grant, because I would like to look at the ones that have applied and then look at the ones that we have. And this will help in our future directions in terms of making it accessible and making having an opportunity for others to apply and to look at ways to help them improve their grant writing.
Madam Chair, if I may.
You recognize ACA Thompson.
Thank you. Ms. McBride, thank you. That's a very good point. At some point in time, yes, ma'am, we would anticipate that all applicants, a listing and the scoring would be available. Until the final recommendations are provided and approved by council, it's our recommendation that we do not do that in the event that we would need to go back and have those reviewed again for some purposes. But that, as we work through this process, we begin to work with what is being recommended currently, but knowing that full disclosure of all information will be available.
Just to follow up, I'm just saying for any grant, most grants have an abstract for those all grant applications, but at least right now, as we look at the ones that are being recommended, there needs to be an abstract with that of the program, a summary. And it's usually about 100 to 300 words. That's standard. Would that be provided?
No, ma'am, we've provided the applications. We can go back and see if there's a way to pull that information out of the applications. We do believe there's project descriptions there.
Well, the project description is not a project summary, but I won't go into that explanation. But general, and I'm not talking about the committee, that the consultant should have had that as a part of the application. And I assume that would have been. And I have Madam Chair, this is not about the committee because that's not our work. That was something that we paid consultants to do that should have been done. Thank you.
And so to that point, I would say that as we move forward with disseminating approved applications. I think that this is a conversation that we can explore, because I do think that it's important that the general body knows not only who's being funded, but what those funds are going for. And so that's something that we can explore to at least as a part of the unveiling, if you allow me to say, the unveiling of the applicants, to at least privy the community and the general public with a project summary of some sort, of an abstract of some sort, to let them know who's receiving these funds and how they can be reached and all. I think that that's something that as a part of really just laying the foundation to say, hey, here's some more funds in the community. This is where you can find them. This is, what they do, what they don't do. I think that's a point that we definitely can explore further.
Thank you. I'm just surprised that it was not a part. But I appreciate at least let us looking at that and having that done. That's information that's really needed.
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Madam Chair.
So I do want to, are there any other comments from any of the other council members before we get started? I see you, Ms. Newton.
Thank you. And not to belabor this, but just to clarify on Ms. McBride's question. So we approved what the application was going to be for the vendors and the applicants, and that's what they responded to. However, I certainly did read these applications and long for an abstract. And so given that this process is set by council, if that was something, understanding that we don't have it now, but that we wanted to request of the applicants, at some point, there's nothing that would bar us from asking that, is there? Okay, thank you.
I just want to follow up on that.
Sure, Ms. McBride.
That's true, but again, I think it was just a mistake, but I'm saying that the consultants that we hired should have provided that. And I assume that was done. But as we read, I've already read all of the applications, probably need to go and read them again. But for others who haven't, the summary is very important. And I know you agree with that, Ms.
No, I do, but I'm just saying I've read them and I would still appreciate it. That's all.
Any further, Ms. Teresa, you recognize?
Yes, I just feel like I wouldn't feel compelled to share. When I first got this booklet, I started to look through the applicants, and I was very excited to see who came through in these grants, because when council prioritized how much money we were going to allocate in the ARPA funds for each category, I was excited to see for the opportunity for some of our community partners to apply and be included in these funds. I will make a statement that I was very surprised to see what applicants both made it into our books and also the ones that I don't see in our books. I know that a lot of these folks are people who, organizations that are very practiced at grant writing, who know what they're doing. And I'm not sure, I'll just make a statement for myself that I'm not sure that I see my priorities reflected in this book in terms of what we have the capacity and power to do given this amount of money that we have through the federal government. So that's just the statement that I wanted to make today.
Thank you. Anything further?
I just want to echo the statement of Ms. Teresa.
So with that, before we turn it over to Mr. Hinkle, I did ask ACA Thomas, Mr. Brown, if it's okay with you to just remind us of some high points of our rubric so that we know where we're starting this conversation. And so as we prepare to dig deep into these applications, just to kind of give us some, give us a launching pad.
Madam Chair.
You're recognized, Ms.
Thank you. To remind everyone where we began with this process, the applications were reviewed for risk assessment. That was done based upon Treasury compliance. There was a possibility of a score of 25 for those. We actually, the committee decided that a cutoff of 15, that you must have a score of 15 or greater to move forward to the vetting of your application by our rubric. Now, keeping in mind that we started at 427 applications, we had to be able to pare some down, and a risk assessment seemed like the likely first and best step according to best practices. From there, the county had approved a rubric, or council had approved a rubric for evaluation of the applications. They were based on 100 points. 30 points were provided for the project summary, 15 points for the project impact, 25 points for organizational background, and 30 points for the budget of the project. Based upon these, what I can tell you is those applications that you have in your book, no one scored below a 70, which was sort of the cutoff. In some cases, you may have those that are recommended that are well above that, but that would have been based upon the requests and the allocations and the available funds in each category.
If Chair?
Yes.
I apologize for interrupting. Could you just repeat the points again?
Sure. Project summary was 30. Project impact was 15. Organizational background was 25. And the budget was 30. And I'll be happy to provide that again to council.
Thank you.
As I was saying, based upon the applications that you've received, it might be a good starting point. Not knowing how you all would like to proceed with this is that as you work through each section, in the beginning of each section of the book there, I've placed a sheet with those applicants that were recommended, as well as the funds that are available in the allocation of money. That if you wanted to ask questions of the consultant, or if you had questions among yourselves that would need to be considered for each application, that might be a good place to start as you work through each category of funding.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thomas. But this time we are going to turn over this presentation to, somebody said, Barry. Oh, yes, sir.
I just have one quick question. Thank you, ma'am, for being recognized, allowing me to be recognized. I see multiple organizations on here in different categories. Is that something that is in good practice for distributing these funds?
Ma'am,
question is clear.
It is. I would just answer your question and say that one of the things the committee considered was whether or not it would limit the number of categories an applicant could apply for. And there was a limit, but it was you could do multiple categories. So we did not restrict applicants from applying for more than one category. That was determined as a part of the process.
And just a quick, I guess more so of a statement. Do we think it's good practice to allow someone to be able to be awarded in multiple categories when we had over 400 applicants that didn't even make the cut and probably didn't make the cut because of their ability to be able to fill this application out at a high level?
When the discussion took place with the committee determined that you may have a provider who does provide services in more than one community impact area, and if they wanted them to be able to apply. So that was just a decision that was made as a part of the process.
All right, thank you, Mr. Brown.
So, but I see you all's hand. I just want to also echo that the committee made this decision and then it was brought to full council. And full council then voted and supported this option as well. And so with that is we did not want, we know that there's several organizations in our community that provide services across multiple areas, and given the strain that COVID-19 put on so many organizations, we wanted them to be able to continue to do the work that they've been doing in the community if they wanted to apply for, I think it was up to 3 areas they could apply for in those areas. And so the full council with a vote supported that. Ms. Newton and then Ms. McBride.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to say, and I guess this is for the body. Well, it's a request and a comment. As I was looking at this, certainly understanding that council had approved allowing people to apply for multiple categories, which I support their application in multiple categories because they may have some applications that work better in other categories than others. As I personally make decisions about how we allocate, applying is one thing. I'm going to pay attention to how we award, because at the end of the day, we had more requests for funding in almost every category than we do have funding. And so then when we're faced with that situation, one of the things that we'll decide as a body is where do we want to allocate? How are we going to break ties, so to speak? And I think that we as a body have the ability to set the criteria. Okay, we said that everybody could apply, but now that we look at awarding, if there are only so many pieces of the pie, do we want the same person to get all the pie? I know how I feel about that. I can guess how others feel, but that's still a decision we can make moving forward. The request that I have is, I know that we have it here, and thank you to the staff. You have done yeoman's work. Every application I read, I thought about the 3 more that I didn't read because somebody else read them. One thing that would be helpful for me is, like we do with some of our H-tax, A-tax discretionary funds, sometimes we have that spreadsheet where it'll say ABC nonprofit, got funding in this category, this category, this category. While they're written on different pages, for me, it would be helpful to see ABC organization applied in youth services, unhoused, such and such, just to look. And then that'll be just one additional tool that helps me see, how some of these recommendations are spread across categories. So does that request make sense? Okay, and hopefully it would be helpful for other people. I know it would be helpful for me. Every bit of information that's possible to see on a grid where I'm comparing multiple things is helpful. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I see you, Tom.
No, go ahead. I'll wait.
I think that you and Ms. Newman addressed my response to Councilman Pugh's question. The full council did vote to allow, I think, up to 3. And I want to go on record for the public knowing that I did vote against it because I did not think that that was a good practice. Also, that I want to make notice that we looked at the impact and the grants that met the scoring to be presented to us as possible funding. We must take into consideration, and again, I'm excusing council members because I think that professional consultants should have known this, but we only gave 15% for the impact. And everything else was basically fiscal. So I think that hurt a lot in terms of the type of programs that we had to end up funding, or those programs that were not funded. And that is strictly my opinion as a professional grant person and as a council person. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Barron, I was going to say that with Mr. Hinkle being remote, if it would help for me to sort of facilitate walking through these, then we could actually ask them the questions relative to the applications, because that would be how they would do. If that would help out, I'm happy to be able to accommodate that.
I think that in my mind, that's where I thought we were going.
Okay, no problem.
Initially. So that will definitely help me get back to how I planned for this meeting. So
Sure.
Thank you.
No problem. So if you would, at the first of your book, you will actually also see that we've been working on thoughts beyond today and through award. So we are currently working on page, I believe it's 3 or 4, subrecipient monitoring workflow and beneficiary monitoring workflow. So we're actually already beginning to work on what it will look like once awards are made to the community, on how they would be shown to be awarded and to actually be monitored, and what that would look like, because it will look different for subrecipients and for benefactors. So those are the things that we're actually working on already. Beyond that, you then have some overviews that sort of goes into each category and the applicants that were recommended for consideration. Now, keep in mind also that if council does make some decisions relative to funding agencies that may have been recommended in multiple categories, we may be able to come back and look at other applicants for consideration as well. So from there, if you would go to page 13 for nonprofit assistance. And then I distributed a summary sheet on each of your desks. The allocation for nonprofit assistance was $1 million. Council actually allocated $365,250 of that allocation during the budget workshop or during the budget process. That leaves an available allocation of $634,750, with the qualified recommendations from Guidehouse being $750,082. Those groups that were recommended during the budget workshop or during the budget sessions were the Community Relations Council Operations for $95,250, the Lurie Center Health and Wellness Program for $180,000, and the PALS.
Thomas,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to stop you just for a moment, just so that we make sure everybody's tracking where you are.
Yeah, I'm not.
I'm doing 2 pages, but I put a handout on your desk that actually has the summary sheets. It's marked 13A, and it's actually in the very front of your book that will go over each one of the recommendations in the nonprofit assistance. And I believe the clerk actually has that on your screen now. So of those that were budgeted, that relieved some of the funding for this category were the Lurie Center for $180,000, PALS for $90,000, and the Community Relations Council for $95,250. That leaves $634,750 for allocation, with recommendations or qualified recommendations of $750,082 in applications. Those applicants are pandemic premium pay for the cooperative ministry, asking for $138,091.20. The Columbia City Ballet asking for $350,000. The security system for the Epworth Children's Home for $131,991. And the Midlands Mediation Small Business Restoring Community Mediation for $130,000. Each of those applications is contained in your books, and we'll be happy to answer any questions or take away any questions that you might have.
Questions as it relates to the nonprofit applications that were submitted. They can be specific to applications or specific to the overall process. Ms. Newton, you're recognized.
I'm sorry. First, a quick question, and I know we spoke to this and you said the number, but I was looking around at a lot of different paper trying to get into the right place. So I'm looking in my packet and I'm on page 4, which has the nonprofit assistance grants requested. And I have the 13A supplement that also lists those. Trying to see. Okay, so I would have to go to page 13 to see the total amount of funding that's available in this category that is referenced on page 4.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Other questions? And so I do have some general questions, and they probably can transfer over to every category. But I'm wondering, because we do have most of our buckets of funding the requests are greater than what we allotted for. Is there any guidance that we can get to come up with some type of suggestion or formula to help us narrow down some of the requests. And so let me just kind of walk through my question further. So for instance, if we have an applicant who has requested, like the Columbia City Ballet requested $350,000. And so of this $350,000, if we say that, you know, we are going to fund all of the applicants in this area, in this particular category, at 50%. I'm just kind of throwing out numbers. Can you give us guidance on how we could make a sound decision to say that we note that there is not enough money to award all of these, but if we are to award them, what is the best practice that shows equality when we make this decision, not very random to say, well, we're going to cut you by, $30,000. I think that we need to have something sound that says, if we're going to cut an applicant by $30,000, how did we get to this point?
Yes, ma'am. And if it will, I'd like to turn that over to the professionals at Guidehouse and let Mr. Hinkle respond to that.
Good afternoon. This is Dustin Hinkle.
Mr. Hinkle, if you would just hold on one second. Councilman Livingston has a question.
So the committees, the consultants are recommending that we fund the agencies at their total request. So there's no idea about saying, maybe 50%, 80%, but the idea is all of these are the fully funded requests for each of the agencies.
Those are the full amounts of the requests. And Mr. Hinkle can respond to this, but I do believe that their indication was that in most areas where it was available, they provided a little over what the actual allocation was, just so that the committee had some discretion in case there was something that they didn't feel or they had issues with funding. But he could respond to that.
I raise that question because I see some who I think, deserve the funding, but I may not agree with the amount, so I don't get an option to deal with that based on the request.
And so, Mr. Livingston, from the committee perspective, it was our thoughts that, one, we already know that there are some applications in here that have unallowable costs that we can't fund based upon Treasury. Like, for instance, automobiles. We know that we can't fund automobiles, but there's several in this packet. So with that, we know that we're going to have to back those, or when I say we, Guidehouse is going to have to back that amount out, and we would not fund them at their full request. So there's still some flexibility from council as well as the committee. Just because they're asking for an amount, we do reserve the right to make recommendations on that amount. Mr. Hinkle, you're recognized.
Yes, ma'am. That was going to be what I was going to open with, that we put the total amount requested to be that initial first cut and first pass. And then the anticipation would be to drill down with the applicants that you would like us to engage with, to identify where those unallowable costs are. What are those costs that they're not necessarily unallowable, but present a higher risk to the county that the county does not want to take on with funding these sub awards. Those would be the areas that we would focus on after going through this